Hello and welcome to the second to the last lecture for our geriatric health lecture series for this spring term. My name is Barbara Cochran. I'm the director of the DeTournier Center for Healthy Aging here in the School of Nursing. And as usual, today I'm representing the Northwest Geriatric Education Center, which sponsors this program. And I just want to remind you again that at the end of this series, these lectures will be posted on our nwgec.org website. If you register, you can view them and download handouts and things like that for free. So take a look for that if you missed any of the lectures in the series. And today I'm happy to introduce to you David LaFazia. He's a research scientist in psychosocial and community health. He's had over 20 years of experience working with older adults with dementia and their caregivers. And over the last 10 years, he's been involved in the development and implementation of randomized controlled trials of behavioral interventions for treating mood, behavioral problems, and sleep disturbances in older adults with dementia and their family caregivers. It's some incredible expertise. He's served as an interventionist in multiple studies, and he's currently a co-investigator on 2 translational projects with the states of Washington and Oregon, and an NIH-funded translational grant where he provides clinical supervision and monitors adherence to the protocol for community-based therapists. And today he's going to talk with us about resilient caregiving for dementia patients. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. The title of the talk is Resilient Caregiving for Dementia Patients. And the reason why I titled it that rather than just caregiving is because I want to focus on what we know about caregiving in terms of what helps caregivers to provide good care for persons with dementia. So that'll be our focus today. And my hope is that by the end of this talk that you'll learn some tools that will help you with your clients who are caring for persons with dementia. So I just wanted to start with this quote because I think that this really encompasses what we're talking about here. That if we think about caregiving in a way that really it impacts everyone, and we're seeing more and more of that. It's in the national news. We know that there is a large number of folks that are caring for not only people with dementia, but caregivers in general of grandchildren, of older adults without dementia, of disabled adults and children too. The focus of this talk is really what I'm going to do is go through the scope of caregiving, a little bit about dementia. I know that's the focus of the whole series, but just to make sure that everybody's starting off at the same level and what we're talking about. But really want to focus most of this talk on what we know about behavioral interventions with folks with dementia. And what I'm going to do is build upon both our research at the Northwest Research Group on Aging, and as a model for the talk and kind of to get us through this is I'm also going to use a book by one of my co-workers, Sue McCurry, that talks about resilient caregiving too. So the scope of caregiving. There are more than 50 million caregivers in the U.S., and a good number of those are caring for older adults or disabled adults. The number of hours and the effort that's put into caregiving is really amazing. With, on average, caregivers spend 20 hours per week providing care. That's a lot. Half-time job. And over 14% of family caregivers are providing 40 hours or more of caregiving per week. So who is it that needs care? The majority of care is provided to family members. So if we look at that pie chart there on the left-hand side, that you can see that only 17% is focusing on non-relatives. The rest is all family care recipients that need care. And of those people that need care, the majority are over the age of 55, or over the age of 50, with 20% age 85 and older. Majority are female, 42% are widowed, over 85% take prescription medications, with a number of those to treat behavioral disturbances, and 23%, so almost 1/4 of care recipients have Alzheimer's disease, dementia, or other mental confusion undiagnosed. So just a little bit about the progression of dementia. It is a progressive disease, going through stages. As you probably are aware of, we don't know why people go quicker through stages, how long people are going to stay in a stage. It's very individual, but what we do know that it is progressive. In the early parts of the disease, we see memory problems, personality disorientation, moving to language difficulties, agitation, trouble with sleep, circadian rhythms get off, where people's sleep gets completely off their 24-hour sleep cycle. They're up all night, sleeping during the day, or sleep sporadically, to the later stages where you see a lot of problems which really affect care, resistiveness, incontinence, and then as you move into the end stages, people are no longer able to walk, no longer able to talk, have trouble swallowing, and are susceptible to infections. So if we look at dementia caregiving in particular, which is what we're going to focus on now, you can see here that care increases, the number of hours increase according to the severity of the disease. So early on in the disease, in the mild to moderate stages, spending anywhere from 12 to almost 20 hours a week. As the disease progresses, that's when the caregiving really takes effect, and the time that's necessary to provide care for people with dementia, over 40 hours per week on average. So what about these people that are caring for people with dementia? I've titled this Unidentified Patient Caregivers. Caregivers have a greater incidence of feeling helpless. They experience more grief than people who aren't caregiving. They experience self-doubt, both in their ability to provide as caregivers, but also in their ability to manage tasks that they used to manage without difficulty. Greater anger, either at the caregiving, the care recipient, or the situation. A lot of guilt around caregiving, anxiety over providing care, and greater sleep disturbances. Caregivers, if you look on the other side there, are also at greater risk for a variety of medical ailments, including diabetes, hyperlipidemia, coronary heart disease, greater risk for obesity, metabolic syndrome. Their immunity is compromised, which makes sense since they're under a lot of stress, and they're at higher risk for blood pressure. So you can see that caregivers are really need to be looked at as the patient too. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. If we think about dementia, and we're talking about what are the types of things that impact care, it really comes down to behavior and mood disturbances. Interestingly enough, caregivers do not find the memory problems associated with dementia as really being a problem. They're not the source of burden or stress. It really is the behavior and the mood disturbances that cause stress in caregivers and impact care. We know that behavior and mood disturbances occur in 70 to 90% of individuals with dementia at some point. So nearly everyone is going to experience that. We also know that they increase as the disease progresses. So as folks move from the mild to the moderate and into the severe stages, they're going to have greater behavior and mood disturbances more often, and those are going to affect the caregiver more too. As I said, they're the primary source of stress and burden to family caregivers. They're the #1 cause of institutionalization for persons with dementia. It's not the physical problems that really lead to institutionalization. It's the behavior problems that cause institutionalization. And we also know that they're difficult to treat. There's not just a single answer for how to treat these disturbances and these problems. So if we think about the types of behavioral challenges that folks with dementia experience, the greatest incidents are those with anxiety and depression. So anxious, angry behavior, agitated, looking at depression, symptoms of withdrawal, inactivity, tearfulness, and then there's some other behaviors too, sleep problems, verbal threats, hallucinations. But if we think about this, what we're really focusing on here in terms of treatment, and what I'm going to talk about, is how do we treat anxiety and depression? We're going to focus on some of the other behaviors too, but really the focus of our work has been on how to treat anxiety with depression. And it makes sense because if you look at those sets, those are impacting more people than any of the other problems. So I like this slide because if we think of this guy here, he's got a broken leg, and I like to think of that as that's the dementia. We're not going to do anything about that leg, the cast. He's always going to have that. There's always going to be the memory problems. There's always going to be the cognitive problems. What we can really start to do is start to chip away at that excess disability, the anxiety, the depression, the other behavioral problems. So that's what we're going to focus on. How do we chip away at that? How do we improve the life for both caregivers and care recipients by reducing depression and anxiety? If we look at the causes of behavioral disturbances in Alzheimer's, to think about it in 4 quadrants. The first one is the physical causes. Physical causes of behavioral disturbances could be vision problems, problems with hearing, problems with walking, unable to feed themselves, those types of things. Cognitive problems have to do with memory or thinking, unclear thoughts, those hallucinations or delusional thoughts, suspiciousness, changes in cognitive thinking. Social and environmental. The social aspect is changes in family orientation. What are the roles that have changed over time? Who's a part of their life now? Not. What happens often, as people get older and have dementia is support systems tend to withdraw because they don't know what to do, and those can impact behavioral problems. And then there's the environment. Where's the physical location that the person's at? Is there a change in living situation? Is there too much noise? Is there too much activity? What's happening within the environment? And then the last area is the historical. And historical is anything that happened in the person's life over time. One of the things we often see is folks who may have worked swing shift, who now have just very great difficulty sleeping. What are patterns that may have held over time? Someone who was always busy, doing something all the time, who no longer can remain active. Those are historical things in the back. Less of an incidence, but still a problem, are maybe issues of abuse or relationship issues over time that can happen. So anything historically that can play in can cause behavioral disturbances. It's not just what happens right now, but you have to look at the whole picture. So why do we focus on behavior? Well, the first thing is we can't change cognition. We can't do anything about the memory. We can't do anything to clear the thoughts. It's a progressive disease, and folks are going to get worse over time. But we can change behavior. We can change the anxiety and depression. We can reduce behavioral problems. We can improve functional status. People can get up, they can walk around more, they can be more physically independent. We can always improve that. And we can increase the quality of life for the patient and the caregiver. And what we focus on in our work is really the dyad, both of them. So as I said earlier, what we're going to talk about now is about interventions and programs that can help people with dementia and their caregivers. And the work that we're going to talk about right now is based on the Seattle protocols. Doctors Linda Terry, Rebecca Logston, and Sue McCurry have been working on the Seattle protocols for over 25 years now. And really what they are is a set standardized behavioral protocol to help people with dementia. And that's just some of the studies that we've done over time, and we'll talk in more detail about those. Key components of the protocols, and they hold true for all the interventions that we do in our work, is it's a partnership. We don't work in a vacuum. We work with caregivers, whether those caregivers are family caregivers, caregivers in adult family homes, assisted living, nursing home. It's a partnership between the therapist or the interventionist, the case manager, the nurse, and the family. They're standardized yet individualized. We have manuals for all the protocols that we do, set manuals for therapists to follow. However, as we know from dementia, it's individual. The disease is individual. So the protocols are standardized, but they're flexible too. Because if you go into a home and you have an itinerary or an agenda for what you're going to do that day, and some catastrophic event has happened for the caregiver just before you walked in, well, they're not going to be able to focus on what you're doing. So we're very individualized for where the caregiver is, and starting with where they are. And then they focus on skill building. Key components of skill building include communication, pleasant events, problem-solving situations using the ABCs of behavior change, and maximizing cognitive function. And we're going to go into detail about those areas. And then, of course, sustainability. As with any protocol, it has a beginning and a set end point. But really the key is, what do people do after you leave? And unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of working with caregivers every week for infinitely. But the Seattle protocols and the work we do is really focused on teaching the tools to caregivers. So what I say is, we might have heard the situation before, and we might have a really great idea for how to deal with this problem, but that's only going to help this problem in this moment. What's really going to help the caregiver is to teach them the tools, allow them time to practice while we're there, and then allows them to have the tools and the skills to continue the sustainability of the programs. So again, as I said, our focus is really on the caregiver and the care recipient. All of our programs and the interventions that I'm going to talk about right now is set to improve both the lives of caregivers and care recipients. We believe that quality of life is influenced by mood, pleasant events, physical function, interactions, and cognitions. So through a series of randomized clinical trials, we support the efficacy of psychosocial and behavioral interventions, targeting these factors for both caregivers and individuals with dementia. So everything we do should have an impact on both of them. And it just comes basically from the idea of what's good for the person with dementia is good for the caregiver, and vice versa. These are behavioral programs. They should improve quality of life for both. And so that's what we focus on. Specifically, what our interventions have focused on, if you look at this list and the citations, the Seattle protocols over time: treatment of depression in persons with Alzheimer's disease, treatment of sleep disturbances in caregivers, sleep disturbances in adult family homes also, treatment of agitation, increasing physical activity through exercise for community caregivers, treatment of sleep disturbances, persons with Alzheimer's disease, behavioral interventions for community consultants. So where we actually have gone out and taught folks in AAA's, case managers, social workers, nurses, how to implement the interventions with dyads. Training staff caregivers in assisted living, again on the behavioral problem-solving approaches. Looking at early stage dementia and the efficacy of support groups for caregivers and care recipients. Very interesting. We actually get both of them in the room at the same time to work with what are some of the things they're experiencing in the early stage memory loss, and giving them the tools as the disease progresses. And then treating sleep disturbances in adult family homes. So some of the outcomes that we've experienced so far: reductions in care recipient and caregiver depression, improvements in care recipient physical function, depression, reducing institutionalization, reduced care recipient behavior problems, reduced caregiver depression, burden, and reactivity to behavior problems. Reactivity is an interesting notion because sometimes the behavior problem is still there, but if the caregiver doesn't have the same reaction to it, i.e. if it doesn't disturb them as much as it did before, well, that's an improvement, right? Because some behavior problems we may not get rid of completely. But if the caregiver has a better understanding with it or has some tools to cope with it where they're not reacting, it does not bother them as much, that's improvement too. Improved quality of life for care recipient, reduced family conflict, and again reactivity, and improved sleep for both caregiver and care recipient, both in community dwelling, dyads, and in adult family home residents too. So these work. So the remainder of my talk is using what we've learned from the Seattle protocols and using the book again by my colleague Dr. Sue McCurry, When a Family Member Has Dementia, to kind of guide us through what we can do for caregivers and persons with dementia. And so she has this interesting notion. It's called dance. And we're going to work through the dance of caregiving, because anyone who's been a caregiver or has worked with caregivers knows that it really is a dance. Everything changes all the time. And you hear caregivers say that they got to be on their toes 24/7 for what happens next. No matter what they prepare for, no matter what they have planned, things can change in a second. So it is a dance. So this acronym, dance. The D, don't argue. Number one thing. You'll lose that argument every time. So we talk about both verbal and nonverbal communication, and we'll get into that in more detail. Acceptance. Look at what's realistic for me to be thinking this person can do. What's realistic for the caregiver to expect from the person with dementia? What's realistic for them to expect from themselves? So a level of acceptance. Nurturing. Doing things for the person with dementia, doing things for the caregiver. Nurture yourself. Respite. Asking for help. Creative problem solving. We're going to talk about the ABCs, which is really the foundation for the Seattle protocols, and how to go about solving problems, looking at behavior change. And then enjoying the moment. Pleasant events. How can we help caregivers get more enjoyment out of their day? How can we help caregivers initiate pleasant activities for persons with dementia? Caregiving is overwhelming. Those pleasant things are often the last thing. They're lost, but they're so important. So, communication, don't argue. Communication can make or break any relationship. It can also make or break any interaction. We've all experienced that, right? Where communication has gone bad. It happens. So what can we do differently? Well, dementia affects both expressive and receptive language. The message communicated from the care recipient is often not the message received by the person with dementia. And as dementia progresses into the mid and later stages, the verbal becomes less important. It's the nonverbal that becomes even of greater importance. I like this quote because when people are dealing with dementia, one of the things they want to do first and foremost is they want to fix those things that aren't reality, right? Because it's very frustrating. They're losing that person with dementia because they're no longer able to relate on what is really happening. So this quote is interesting because, it's a big worry for the caregiver, but is it really an issue? Well, no. You can't do it. The person with dementia cannot snap out of it. She can't get that her other daughter on the East Coast did her hair. And you know what? It's not important. But it may be important in that moment. So we work with people about communication and how to go about that. Because if we think of the person with dementia, it's a disease. It's progressive. It's impacting memory. It's impacting the concept of time. Sure, if she would have thought that out and realized how could her daughter got all the way from the East Coast to do her hair and then back, but there's no concept of time. Reasoning, language difficulties, and recognizing objects. It's a disease. It's not going to get better. The person's cognition is not the same. They're not thinking clearly. So if we look at communication, what are some of the things that we can do? Well, in the early stages, allow time for unhurried interactions. Planning ahead as much as possible. Hurrying people with dementia causes anxiety. Double check instructions to make sure the person understands them. The person in the mild or without dementia may get instructions first time you say them. They may be able to follow through. With the disease, and as it progresses, much more difficulty getting instructions. You think they might be getting it, but they don't. So you got to double check with them. Try using written instructions, especially in the early stages. Avoid challenging the person. And then answer repetitive questions consistently. People with dementia can still get what people are saying. And consistency is very important. As folks move into the middle or later stages of the disease, some of the key components of communication are using a soothing voice, speaking slowly and clearly, not loudly. You can yell and yell. I often think of the game Pictionary, where you're writing down, and, drawing a picture, and the person doesn't get it. So you draw it again, and then you draw it again, and then you point at it, and then you're breaking the pencil on the paper because you think they should get it, and then you're circling it. Not going to happen. Slowly. Clear instructions. If it doesn't work, try another way of explaining it. Make eye contact so the person knows that you're speaking with them. Pleasant facial expression. Use non-threatening body language. Don't stand over a person. Get down to their level. Don't fold your arms like this or cross your legs. It's very threatening. People with dementia pick up on those things much more than they do the verbal communication. One instruction at a time, and reduce distracting background noises. And I would add lights, too, to that. Dr. Linda Terry's come up with this phrase, and it's called listen with respect, comfort, and redirect. Even if we do all those things that we just talked about with communication, sometimes we get stuck with communication. So what can we do? Well, I like to think about this as when we get stuck or we're in a challenging situation with a person with dementia, is just remember, listen with respect, comfort, and redirect. Make eye contact. Make sure that the person knows that you're speaking with them. Respect. Pay attention to their nonverbal cues. They might not be able to tell you how they're feeling, but you may be able to pick up a lot of if they're receiving your communication or how they're receiving it by their nonverbal communication. Comfort. Pay attention to what they're thinking or feeling. Let them know that you understand. And then redirect. Attempt to change the subject or try something new, a new activity. Listen with respect, comfort, redirect. So now we move to the A of dance. And this is realistic expectations. Dementia affects the way a person thinks, feels, makes decisions, and reacts. They don't have control over their symptoms. Again, they can't snap out of it. They're not doing this to be difficult. Dementia symptoms, they fluctuate. Just as we were talking about with the stages. People can have good days and bad days. Folks can spend years in the early and mid stages. Folks can go through them within weeks or months. They fluctuate, and they're usually unpredictable. And because of the brain disease, especially early on, they may not realize how much help they need. I'm being realistic. I like this quote. I like to think about this as I read the same stories over to my 6- and 2-year-old over and over and over again, read it again. But, this quote really does hold true. So what about realistic expectations? In the early stage, Obtain medical evaluation to rule out treatable causes of dementia. It's always good to get a medical workup. Encourage a person to be independent in normal routines. Often when folks get a diagnosis of dementia, we want to do everything for them. That's the worst thing we could do. People can remain independent for a long time, so even in the mid and later stages, we want to encourage independence as much as possible. But there's also going to be gaps in ability and unpredictable changes. But don't assume that these are deliberate or due to denial or lack of motivation. They're part of the disease progress. As we move into the mid and later stages, we need to, again, regularly check things. Double check them, triple check them. Driving, financial records, medications, diet, hygiene. Talk to others in the family about concerns that you have. Don't expect the person to readily accept your help. It's probably not going to happen. There's going to be struggles. And do expect to feel upset, embarrassed, disappointed. It's hard. Caregiving is hard. Some things to look at, some resources for increasing caregiver knowledge, a couple of books and websites. Help the caregiver to become students. And then the end, nurture yourself. Take a break. Encouraging caregivers to take that break. They're only as helpful as caregivers if they're able to do it, right? They have to have the energy to do it. So, check how you're feeling. Physical and emotional health. Ask who in your life wants to help out but doesn't know how. And help them to know how. I was recently leading a group with, again, early stage memory loss folks and their caregivers, and we talked about who in your social group, who in your family can help out. And we talked about, all these people had great crises plans set. If something happened to them, who would take care of their loved one? But one of the things that came up was how to access and ask for help now before the crisis happens. Because that person or persons who are willing to help in a crisis probably want to help now too. So figure out a way to incorporate them into your routine, into the caregiving now. Find something that they want to do. People want to help, but they need direction. Find 10 minutes every day to do something that you love. Again, taking time out. And respite. It's good for the caregivers and the person with dementia. Taking a break. I like this quote because isn't this the hardest thing? When you're the primary caregiver and you're providing care 24 hours a day, you don't think that the person can make it if you're not there. Well, the truth of the matter is that they can. You've got to find ways to get you a break, and quite possibly in the process of it, the person with dementia will find something they enjoy too. So, nurture yourself. Early stages, stay involved in meaningful outside activities. Not only outside, but outside of the home too. Exercise, exercise, exercise. I don't know if there's anything that can be more important than that. Because if you're exercising, there's just a whole litany of benefits. Maintain a careful diet, follow the doctor's recommendations, and find someone you can talk to about how you're doing. A support group, a friend, a family member, somebody to talk to. Mid or later stages, again, regular respite and relaxation, finding things to enjoy. Ask people to help you and help them to help you. Let people help you when they offer, and consider respite and adult day programs. Again, community resources, Adult Day Services Association, Alzheimer Association, Area Agencies on Aging, respite, giving caregivers resources so that they can get a break. Isn't this great? Because oftentimes the hardest thing to do is just to try something. But really, if you think about it, there's very little risk and high reward. If the person goes and they don't like it, well, you try something else, right? It's a behavioral intervention. You don't have to wait 14 days for them to come off the medication or 14 days for it to work or more. You just try something else. But the hardest thing is to do that first step. But try it and be surprised. So now we'll get to the C, creative problem solving, the ABCs of behavior change. This section is really focused on what we were talking about earlier, where we went over the prevalence of behavior problems, mood, anxiety in persons with dementia, and how that is really the main problem that causes stress and burden in caregivers. So we look at the ABCs, and all of our work at the Northwest Research Group on Aging really centers around the ABCs. It's a behavioral problem-solving approach. And the idea here is that behaviors do not happen in a vacuum. They sometimes seem that they do. They happen out of the blue. You know, I don't know what happened. I just walked into the room, and he threw the book. Well, something happened before that to activate the behavior. And then something happened after that, a consequence of the behavior. What happened after the behavior? Did it make it better or worse? The ABCs. So how do we do that? How do we change the ABCs of behavior? Well, the first thing we do is we look for the antecedent. What happened before the behavior? Interestingly, we're not asking what triggered the behavior. Because if you ask a caregiver what caused the behavior, they may have an idea or they may not, but you're limiting opportunities. You have to ask what happened before. We want a list of what happened before. Everything that happened before the behavior happened. What was the caregiver doing? What was the care recipient doing? What was the dog doing? Who else was involved? What was happening before? And then we define and observe the problem behavior. What exactly is the behavior? Behaviors are observable events. If you say somebody is sad, that's not a behavior. A behavior is crying. A behavior is not wanting to get off the couch. Those are observable behaviors. Who does it happen around? Does it only happen with the caregiver and not when the daughter comes to visit? Or does it only happen when the daughter and the caregiver are there? You know, what is the situation around the behavior? Where does it happen most? In the living room, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, when they're out in the car, whatever that area is. And when does it occur? Both how frequently it occurs and what time of day or what day it occurs, or what is the situation around it. You know, when does it occur? Well, it occurs when the landscaper is working in the yard. That's when it occurs. So when does it occur? What is the situation? And then the C is the consequence. What happened immediately after the behavior? How did others react? And did that reaction make the behavior better or worse? So ABCs, it's simple, but not at the same time. Brainstorming is not always easy. It's hard. Behaviors can be influenced by more than one thing at a time. And that's why when we talk about activators, we really want to look at everything that happened before the behavior. Oftentimes with behaviors, the message being communicated is more important than the actual behavior. And I like to think about this in the situation of what's the underlying need that the behavior is accomplishing, right? So someone who yells for the caregiver every time they leave the room, well, what is that behavior accomplishing? What's the need? Well, it's a need for somebody to be present, right? What's the message that's being communicated? Observation is critical and challenging. Key to behavioral problem solving, observing the problem. Those 4 W's that we talked about. And the caregiver is always right. We run into this all the time, right? We might have an idea with what's the biggest issue that the caregiver should deal with, but it's not what they want to deal with. Or if we look at problem solving, we might have an idea based on our experience of what they should try first, but that's not really going to help them. They're right. Whatever they want to do is the right thing. Because again, The key to the problem-solving approach is how can you teach caregivers to continue doing this when you're not there? Because these behaviors happen any time of the day or night. So, how do the ABCs really work? Well, step one, the problem happens, the B. Step two, take a deep breath. 2.5, notice, what is the caregiver doing? What are you doing? Ask these questions. Are you upset, arguing, yelling, restraining them, comforting, soothing, ignoring, or redirecting them onto another activity, or trying to reason logically? And whatever the caregiver is doing, is it helping? If yes, well, that's a good plan. Keep it up. If not, try anything. Try something, try anything different. And then we look at the antecedents. Reflect on what was going on before the problem developed. What was the caregiver doing? What was the person with dementia doing? Again, what was happening with the environment? Other people in the room, noises, activities, personal care, lighting. What's the situation? How was I feeling at the time? Was I rushed because once again we were going to be late for the doctor? Was I worried? Was I irritable, distracted, trying to do a couple of things at the same time? What was happening? Often you'll hear caregivers say, I don't know. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what happened before, right? So that's where observation becomes key. Keep a log. Observe what happens when this behavior happens the next time. Chances are it's going to continue happening. If they've identified it as a problem, it's going to happen. Keep a log of what's happening. Also, ask someone else to help you observe too, because there may be some things that you're missing. Teamwork. So common triggers or activators to look at for behavior problems. First, we want to assess for pain or physical discomfort. If there's any infections, especially if there's a sudden change in cognition or behaviors, we want to look at infections, especially UTIs. Medication side effects. Oftentimes the medications that we're using to help treat behavior problems will enhance those behavior problems that we're actually trying to treat. Fatigue, over or under stimulation, and then again, going back to communication. Communication probably the number one trigger for problem behaviors. So thinking ahead, making a realistic plan. Again, select problems that can be changed, right? We can't change cognition. We can't change memory. We can't make the care recipient remember that it's time for breakfast, but we can do some things around the problem to get them to breakfast. Select problems that occur frequently, right? Because those are the ones that we can change. We want problems that occur often. Sometimes the trigger or the activator can be small. Be a very small thing that can happen. When we implement plans, consistency is critical. We encourage caregivers to give it time, and that's why we want problems that occur frequently, because we may have the best laid plans, but our plan might not work the first time, right? It might not work the second time too, but trying it over time and being consistent with that plan. And then ask others to help brainstorm how you can change the activator or the consequence. Get lots of ideas. When we think about the ABCs and developing a plan, the more things you can get down on paper, the better. The more ideas you can come up with, the better. Sure, your first idea may work. It might work for 5 straight days. On the 6th day, it may not work at all. So the more you get down, the better, so that the caregiver is prepared to try other things. Because again, you're not going to be there all the time. And if they have those things to look at, they're more apt to try things rather than reacting to the problem. So, last part of our dance, the E, Enjoy the moment. Finding the gifts of dementia care. Laughter and love are good medicine, both for the caregiver and the person with dementia. Pleasant events, things that folks enjoy. They improve mood and reduce behavior problems. If we think about it, I like to think about it as a scale. The more pleasant events, the better the mood. Just makes sense, right? It holds true for all of us too. If we're actually doing activities that we enjoy, we feel better. If we get so bogged down into the day-to-day things and we're not doing things we enjoy, we're probably not especially happy and our mood's probably suffering for it. Same thing for caregivers, same thing for persons with dementia. The more pleasant events, the better. And then helping caregivers to look for uplifts. Why are you a caregiver? And what does your loved one give back? They may not be able to give back what they could or what you'd like or what they would want to do before they had dementia. But chances are there's still things they give back, in helping caregivers to identify and find those things. So why do caregivers do it? Why are they caregivers? Well, because they have a heart for the job. Many caregivers identify as feeling fulfilled, or it gives them a purpose. We know that caring makes a difference for care recipients. Oftentimes caregivers want to give back to a loved one who cared for them. Run into cultural family traditions. Well, this is just what we do. We take care of our own, take care of our loved ones. And then the question, well, what if this was my mom or dad, or me, who needed care? We go back to that quote we started out with by Rosalind Carter. Everybody's impacted by caregiving. I like this quote because as we move into talk about pleasant activities and pleasant events, I think it's important to remember that the person with dementia can still benefit from these things. Even though they may not remember who their daughter is, or who their husband is, or who their good friends are, there is still a level that they can be reached at. And they still have the ability to enjoy. Quality of life is important. So what can we do? Well, we can increase these pleasant events. So we ask these questions. What did the person enjoy doing in the past? What kinds of activities did they enjoy? What do they enjoy doing now? How can tasks be modified to accommodate current abilities? Well, sure. You might not be able to go out and golf 18 holes, but why can't you put a golf club, a putter, and a golf ball in the living room? Golf, right? May not be able to go out and work in the garden. What about a few flower pots on the kitchen table? Whatever that is, modify. How can they be modified to accommodate current abilities? And then who is available to help with these activities? This goes back to the area earlier when we talked about getting other folks involved. Sometimes people don't know what to do. But think about in your circle, who can help out with pleasant activities? Oftentimes, again, people want to help, and if they had a set thing to do with instructions, they're much more apt to do it, right? If there's a certain day of the week that they come by to help to do a certain activity, it can be enjoyable. So in our work, we have something called the Pleasant Event Schedule. It's a tool. We actually have a long version, which is 50 items, a shorter version, 25 items. It's a tool to help get at categories of pleasant activities that persons with dementia enjoy. If you look in the first section there, it's the activity, and just an example of 4 of them. The frequency is how much a week people enjoy this activity. And then the last column is how much they actually enjoy it. What often happens, what's interesting, is sometimes you'll go through this and you'll go through the activity and you'll check a box and then you go to frequency and they haven't done it at all. But then you go to enjoyment, well, they enjoy it a great deal. So that's something we want to do more. And then there's some things that we just do and we don't think about it, and the opposite holds true, right? Where you get to an activity, well, I take him shopping with me all the time. Well, we go 7 or more times. Does he enjoy it? No, not at all. Well, that might be an activator for some problem behaviors. If he never enjoys shopping, never enjoyed it before, doesn't enjoy it now, what can we do to lessen those kinds of activities they don't enjoy and increase the ones they do? So it's a nice tool to get caregivers to begin to think about pleasant activities. Again, it's limited. We have limited categories here, but it's a way to start that conversation. And what we've found is really starting the conversation is really the key. These problems and thinking about changing, thinking about doing the ABCs, thinking about implementing pleasant events, they're overwhelming for a caregiver who's providing care 24/7. But if you have tools and you utilize things to get them to think about it, it's amazing what starts to happen there. So for pleasant events, some sample categories to think about. Again, physical activity, exercise, any kind of exercise, walking around the house, stretching, whatever it is, doing chores, having them come along, hobbies, anything that expresses creativity and gets people doing something. Life story notebook, reminiscing in a way that can be shared easily with others when they come to visit, picture books, making captions so as to help the person with dementia explain it to others. A memory notebook, especially in the early phases of dementia, with simple instructions for doing things that matter so that they can still participate, when the caregiver isn't there, or a way to have more control over their environment. And I think this is so important. Every interaction can be a pleasant event. When we think about caregiving, a lot of these things they're going to have to happen anyway. The bathing, the dressing, the brushing the teeth, the meals. So how can we help caregivers make those interactions pleasant? A smile, music, a pat on the back, whatever it is, trying to make those interactions pleasant. But there are obstacles to activities. There's lack of time or money. Plan is too complicated. Right? Again, the caregiver is always right, but you often they're so excited now to try an activity, but you want to make it simple. Or a balance of more simple, easily accessed activities and maybe more extravagant outings to a play or a favorite restaurant or whatever it is. Keeping things simple, opportunities for success. Negative behaviors can often interfere with pleasant events. So working on the ABCs with those behaviors so that we can implement more pleasant events. Caregivers just burnt out. They don't want to try anything. Their participant refuses to participate. So if they do, then you try something different. But it's amazing once caregivers try something, how they can see that change happen. Mr. Davis was somebody, he had Alzheimer's disease, and this was what he wrote in his journal. And I think this is so important too. If it's not working, or if they're not enjoying it, try something different. And then, of course, sometimes it's all we need to get started. So, what are the advantages of behavioral treatment? Well, unlike medications, behavioral treatment addresses the interpersonal environmental causes of behavioral disturbances. There's no interactions with other medications or side effects. We don't have to wait to see if it works. We know right away if it works. Behavioral interventions are very empowering for caregivers and individuals with dementia. It's a tool. It gives them the tool to use in future situations. Sustainability. What can we do in the short time when we're working with caregivers so that when we're not there, that they can solve these problems? Again, partnering with family caregivers. They're the experts about their relative. So really highlighting that with your treatment approaches and with the interventions. In our work, we really see ourselves as consultants. We're not experts. We're not therapists per se. We're just there to consult, to help out, giving information about dementia and problems. What we found in our work, too, is it's often necessary to work with other family members, in addition to other healthcare providers. So in our work, if you can access other family members, it can really help the caregiver on to accessing those things for themselves and those people. So what are the characteristics of resilient caregivers? Well, they have the energy, desire, and ability to do things differently. They want that information. They want to try something new. They want to be better caregivers. They have a willingness to ask for and accept help from others. And if they don't, how can we help them to access those people that can help? They have flexibility in thinking and problem solving, and that's really the key component of the ABCs, is being flexible and creative. You have to have a sense of humor to be a caregiver, especially a caregiver of somebody with dementia. Patient, but able to be firm and consistent. Have the belief that things can change and that change can be good. And of course, having a good prior relationship with a person with dementia helps too. So, how do we help caregivers get there? Well, key is to stay in touch with their values, finding some kind of purpose and meaning in the role as a caregiver. Realistic expectations. Perfection is not the goal. It's not possible. Good enough caregiving. And again, remembering you're not alone. So, thank you. This is the other members of our research group here.
Do we have questions from here? And then we're going to open up the chat.
I have a question. I just wonder, when you're implementing this, you're going out and teaching the Seattle protocol. Going back to where caregivers are the unidentified patient, is there some kind of more like an emotional support because the caregiver is going through, maybe a lot of anger, a ton of loss, the ambiguous loss that dementia is, and treating that caregiver as a patient alongside you're teaching them how to do these things that, you have to be flexible and smart and da-da-da-da. Meanwhile, I'm having a huge loss and I'm angry. Mm-hmm. Do those two things, do they kind of need to go together? Do you think?
Yeah. Do I need to repeat the question?
Yeah. He said
okay.
you don't.
Okay.
So
all right. So
they'll let us know soon enough if you do.
Okay. So it's a very good question. I think that in our work they do need to go together. What are those emotional issues that they're dealing with while we're trying to work on these behavioral problems? With our protocols in our work, we touch on some of those emotional issues, but it's not something that the protocol specifically deals with. So what we do is we really set it up from the beginning that these are the set tools, these are the things that we're going to work on week to week, and they have an agenda and they know the areas that we're going to work on. But we also leave time during each session to deal with caregiver issues. And then we have specific, in all our protocols actually, we have specific sessions that just deal with the caregiver and accessing resources. So we don't really have enough time when we're in our interventions, or we haven't built it in to actually provide counseling, emotional support. But if that's an issue, we would refer folks to the proper place to talk about that, be that individual counseling, support groups, or whatever that might be.
Tal Keaton is wondering, what issues are you and your team presently researching?
Good question. So actually, a couple of things we're currently doing. We're actually, our main focus right now is taking our interventions and figuring out ways to bring them to the community. So we actually have a couple of projects going on. We're taking our intervention, it's called RDAD, Reducing Disabilities in Persons with Alzheimer's Disease, and it's an intervention that's a combination of an exercise program that we do in the home with caregiver and care recipients, and a behavioral problem-solving approach using the ABCs, communication, pleasant events. And we have a translational study of that program where we're actually teaching case managers in AAAs in Oregon and Washington how to implement the intervention, and then they're implementing it with their caseload. Another project that we have going on is a similar intervention called STAR-C with community caregivers, where we're working with folks both in Washington and Oregon too, with just a behavioral problem-solving approach. So those are our translational studies, and then a current study we have is working with folks with early stage memory loss and their caregivers, and it's unique because we have them in the same room in small group environment and teaching them social aspects of caregiving, specifically pleasant events, and a group exercise program too.
Missoula is wondering if the Pleasant Events schedule is available online, and if so, or even if not, what's the cost?
I don't know if it's available online, but you can email me and I'd be happy to give it to you. We make it available to anybody who wants it.
Anchorage says, we have an elder who often refused ADL care from our female CNAs. Her history is that she was an ombudsman. She believes our female CNAs are her subordinates. Not much of an ombudsman, if you me. She does accept ADL, usually from our male CNAs. How can we get her to accept care from our female CNAs? I'm drawing an assumption, perhaps, that she's got some stage of Alzheimer's, but...
Okay. So I don't have a specific instruction, but I would say if you use the ABCs, you already know, you've already identified what one activator might be for the behavior, and that's the female nursing assistant. But look at observations and look at it. There could be some things that the males are doing that a specific male CNA is doing that another CNA is not doing. Or there might be ways to set up the environment in such a way that they would. So I would look at the ABCs, observe over time, brainstorm with other caregivers, what's happening before, what's happening after, and it might be possible to come up with some other solutions for that.
What if the caregiver or family member does not have a good prior relationship with the patient? How can that person, the caregiver, still be resilient?
That is a challenge. That is a challenge if there isn't a good prior relationship. I think there can, unfortunately, probably not going to be able to solve long-standing issues. It's amazing what happens though sometimes if there isn't a good relationship, and as the disease progresses, sometimes some of those issues are lost then, and it becomes a new relationship. So there's an opportunity for that. I think encouraging folks, if we look at the DANCE acronym, in ways that they can nurture themselves as a caregiver, the relationship may never be great, but ways that they can find things, find gems, find things that they enjoy that might at least make the caregiving situation just a little bit better.
Missoula asks, do you have any experience or information on the use of a weighted blanket for anxiety? Heard of that?
I have not heard of that, no.
Interesting. Sounds like a little bit like swaddling. Or
yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. It might work, yeah.
Any other questions from the group here? Questions from the sites? We'll give them a couple of minutes. Sometimes they start chiming in. Yeah, see, someone's typing. Sometimes it's just a thank you.
I kind of like the idea of swaddling.
Yeah.
Sort of nice.
It could be very comforting, sure, yeah.
That's what they say about babies.
Yeah.
Kids with autism.
Right.
Will do that.
Multiple attendees are typing. Oh, interesting. What is your email address to write to for the Pleasant Events schedule?
Good question. It's DLaFazia, DLAFAZIA @uw.edu.
I'm going to put it in here so they can get it.
Okay.
DLAFAZIA. And then I have to allow for the fact that I make typing errors.
Barbara, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
So the one of the first slides, it's about it's all in the family who needs care. So I noticed. I mean, you have mother, father, grandmother. So are those relationships defined by who's providing the care? I mean, I could be taking care of. Do you know?
Right. Yes. Yes, they are defined by who's providing the care, and that actually speaks to both like daughters and daughters-in-law
Right.
who are providing the care.
It's sort of. I mean, it's a little not specific. I mean, it doesn't tell us anything about. I mean, it tells us male versus female.
Mhm.
It doesn't. I don't know. It's a little confusing slide to me.
So
it raises questions.
It raises questions. Yeah, and there's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, I guess the what I would want folks to take from that is that it's family. That caregivers are providing care for relatives, for family members. Yeah. Yeah.
Talkeetna's wondering, how are referrals made to your center?
Good question. So we're not actually a clinical center. We're a research group. So it depends on which research study we have going on at the time. We're in the School of Nursing here at the University of Washington. So and affiliated with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here at the UW. We partner with the Alzheimer's Association and area agencies on aging. So it really just depends on what the project is at the time. If you're interested in specifically now, I would, and you're in Washington or Oregon, we might be working with your AAA on a couple of different projects right now, so you could contact them and see if we're working with them.
Is there somebody you can refer to? Is somebody implementing this clinically? That you could say, oh, call this group, they do this, they will implement this for you, they will give you this treatment.
Well, so is somebody doing it clinically? At the AAAs. At the AAAs. That's, I mean, so implementing it at the King County AAA, Pierce County, the AAA in Wenatchee, down in Multnomah County, Medford, Oregon, so a variety of different AAAs and counties. I don't have specific contact people, but I think if you're in Washington or Oregon and you contact your AAA, we might be working with them now.
David, what's the status of the STAR training that you guys have done in the past?
Okay, so the STAR training stands for Staff Training Assisted Living Residents, and it's a training program a little different about what I was talking about here today, but it's working with both nurses assistants and nurses and social workers, other professionals in assisted living. So we train assisted living staff to implement these behavioral interventions. And we've actually just concluded a 20-site randomized controlled trial of the STAR program. Our next step actually is similar to the other programs, is working on how to train other folks in the STAR training. So we do offer that to assisted livings. If they would like to access it, they can contact us, and we're happy to come and implement the STAR training at their sites.
Palmer is wondering how to handle a spouse who believes and tells the spouse with Alzheimer's they are getting better.
Well, you know, if we think back to one of the things we earlier talked about, just the whole reasoning and realistic expectations. And I'd like to think of using the listen with respect, comfort, and redirect. I would encourage the spouse to listen to them, comfort, acknowledge that they understand, and then redirect onto a different topic.
Other questions? Okay.